Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Touhou Luna Nights. In the last one we started and finished all of Stage 2, fighting off Marisa in the process, and then we started off Stage 3 here, getting about halfway through, getting the grip knife power up in the process, and now that we have it and can jump up on our time frozen knives, we can get up here to head towards the rest of the end game for the stage. So I want to take a moment here while we're going through this giant hallway filled with knight statues that you can't tell are going to be enemies until you get right next to them, though you can at least see that they have a graze meter one time stop to tell which ones are real or not. I want to take some time to start talking about this game's developer, Team Ladybug. They're a relatively small team, but every single one of their games is A, really fun, and B, probably some of the best sprite work that's still going on in the industry to an insane degree. And what's funny is, as far as I know, their first game they actually put out was an add-in with a Konosuba Blu-ray in Japan only. Oh, hello again, Nitori. Hey, we meet again, human. Nitori again? You're always working hard to collect jewels. I've been wondering for a while, but what do you plan on doing with all those jewels? These jewels are crystallized MP. Possessing them will improve your powers. Huh? Wait a second. That's the first I've heard of that. Huh? What? Really? Maybe I forgot to tell you? You can check what kind of power a jewel has on the shopping screen. I see. But if having the jewels improves my powers, isn't it better not to sell them? No, it's better to sell them and buy items. It only improves your powers a little. I think you just want to do business. No, you're wrong. Anyway, I'd appreciate it if you'd sell me lots of jewels. That's the first time the game actively tells you what I told you, I believe, back in part 1. Again, the stat boosts for jewels are there, and they do come in handy in a pinch, but they're really hard to notice unless you're actively paying attention to the stats on the pause screen / map screen at all times. But yeah, Team Ladybug's first game was a tie-in game that was included in a Blu-ray of Konosuba Season 2, I believe it was. So, more than likely not playable in English in any official regard. There might be a fan translation of it somewhere on the internet. I'm actually not too certain of that. Future me, if you could do some research on that, that'd be nice. After that, their next game was actively a freeware Shin Megami Tensei game called Synchronicity Prologue, where you play as the Jack brothers going through a Metroidvania map. I haven't finished that one, but it's pretty cool from what I played of it. Right there we got our next sub-weapon, the 1,000 Daggers. It says you throw 1,000 daggers. I think that is a bit of an overestimation, but not for nothing. It wrecks enemies shit. You throw a lot of daggers straight forward in a straight line. It's effectively the dagger item crash from Castlevania Rondo of Blood. But it does have some shortcomings. Notably, you can only use it on the ground, and it's only really super useful against ground-based enemies, so bosses who are usually in the air aren't exactly the best target for it. And you still have to keep in mind the max amount of knives you can have on screen if you're trying to use it during a time stop. So you gotta be under constant threat when you use it, and because you're locked in place, that means you're pretty open for damage. But yeah, Synchronicity Prologue, really cool game that I think I just called it freeware. It technically was official. It just was available for free for a limited time. I don't even think it's available for purchase nowadays. You have to figure out some other way to download it. Their first game that's commercially available for purchase in their release order is actively this one, which I think was released the next year. After this, they continued doing a couple of more licensed games, I believe. I think their next one immediately after this was a Record of Lodos War game about Deedlit. That was another Metroidvania with gorgeous sprite work, although her running animation is very directly just Alucard from Symphony of the Night. After that, they did 2 other games, Draenus and Blade Chimera. Draenus is from 2022, Blade Chimera was from this year. I've played a little bit of Blade Chimera, I'm probably going to finish that at some point. Draenus, I don't think I've ever touched at all. But it's worth noting that they got a pretty consistent output for really gorgeous sprite work, which is rare to see to this extent nowadays. Usually if a game's got gorgeous sprite work, you're waiting 4 or 5 years for a new game from a developer. They're getting one out every 2 or 3, which is pretty uncommon nowadays, honestly. Helps probably that they have a pretty small team, and all their games, not for nothing, are also pretty short. So it's like there's a potential sense of, scope control and all that, which is something we're drastically missing in a lot of games nowadays, I find. So if you leave this room via the top left exit, you're going to quickly actually find yourself in the next stage aesthetic. With that said, there's a door blocking your way, so we need another colored key, so we need to find the boss, who is, thankfully, just this way. Thankfully, this is a stage where they keep the door pretty close to where the boss is. In fact, the remaining few bosses in the game are right next to the main door you actively need to access afterwards. Oh, also, I don't think I mentioned this part yet. Whenever you actively throw knives and they stick into things like the walls and floors and ceilings, you actively can pick them up to gain the MP that you used on them back. With that said, there's times where that's not exactly going to be reliable for gaining a lot back. Hello? That's Aku's voice. What's wrong? A powerful witch is waiting just beyond this point. It might be difficult with your power sealed, but don't give up. Don't worry, I can already handle my power of time. You may not be able to stop time, but you can slow it down. If you use it well, you can win. Listen to what I'm saying. I can already use my power to stop time. I wonder what's wrong. You don't need to thank me. This is all I can do. Huh? Oh, hello. Aku, why are you speaking so strangely? No particular reason. I was tired, so I was resting. Something is wrong. I wonder what happened. Odd. Well, either way, save on up because it's time for our next boss fight against a fan favorite. Sakuya, you came earlier than I thought. As I thought, Miss Patchouli is here. How is it? Are you having fun? I guess. Miss Patchouli, did you create this world? It was Remy's usual request. If it doesn't exist, let's make it. The Red and White Shrine Maiden gets upset if we try anything in the Gensokyo, so we created a separate space. I guess since it's been so peaceful, Remy needed some excitement. If you would have said so from the start, I would have played along. It's no fun if we tell you. The element of surprise is what makes it exciting. That may be true, but I have plans too. Remy's selfishness always pops up suddenly. You're right. Anyway, we're here, so we might as well have some fun. I don't mind, but is your health okay? There's nothing to worry about. Today is a good day. I will show you a bit of my true magic powers. Boss 3 is Patchouli Knowledge, and she usually starts off by raining down a bunch of spears from both her own hands as well as the books she spawns in. A lot of the projectiles in this fight are either going to come from her directly or her magic books. She's next up doing her fireball attack, which will fire fireballs down from each book, which will then break left or right to try and hit you directly. She can make her books rain down some water while firing some projectiles directly at you. This is when we want to try and slow down time rather than use the time stoppage, because the time stop will make those waterfalls into walls you can't get past. Generally, Chainsaw is a very useful weapon here because she spends so much of the fight very high in the air, but you gotta be careful all the same. The leaf attack here is one you really need to keep your eyes out for because those also have the green aura, so when you stop time, they'll move at you. So if you're using that too haphazardly, it's very easy to get blindsided because your eyes are elsewhere. The books can also shoot out dragons that just try to slowly home in on you, but usually they'll only pass by you once and then go off to parts unknown. She'll occasionally send out these, I guess, electric fireballs, which sounds redundant, which will hover over the ground for a second before hitting the floor. The rocks that spew up when they make contact with the floor, though, also do damage, so watch out for that. However, it's a good time to use a time stop to try and get some good grazes in. Same with this attack. Otherwise, the only other attack she has right now until we get to the point where she does her ultimate of sorts is just a wave of fireballs out of her and the books that go in a slight circular formation, but there's enough breaks in there where it's very easy to get around it. Well done. How about this? So, Patchouli's ultimate is spawning in another 2 books, which means there's effectively twice as many projectiles coming at you at any time in this fight. It's the simplest ultimate, but honestly, not for nothing, it might be the most effective because it's not like it's one attack that you know the way around. You have to sort of relearn the way around all of her attacks, and she does have a good few. And not for nothing, the phone call with Aku prior to this fight is actively very welcome, as on my first playthrough especially, I completely forgot I had that after I got the time stop because one very much just feels more powerful than the other throughout a majority of the platforming at least. But during the boss fights, it's very important to remember you have both, and this is arguably the best fight for it, as that gives you plenty of opportunities to sneak around certain projectiles that are in awkward positions, or especially to get some extra grazes while taking things a little bit more safely. Honestly, it might just be because of the 4 books especially. I do think Patchouli is the hardest boss relative to the point in the game that she is at. as the amount of projectiles on screen here is noticeably higher than both Marisa and Meiling, while still not being as ridiculous as the later bosses, but they're also later bosses, so it makes sense for them to be a little more busy, to put it lightly. On a first playthrough, this is the boss that overall gave me the most shit due to that exact scenario, as I was a lot more prepared for the following bosses after fighting this. With that said, that also means if you can find your way around projectiles in this fight decently well, using the time slow and time stop respectively, while also keeping some punishment going, you're gonna do more than well enough against what's coming up. My asthma, when I least need it. I'm sorry. Without thinking, I went all out. Don't apologize. It was fun. I'm surprised you could use your powers, though. We should have sealed them. Did you break the seal by force? This is thanks to a gadget-loving kappa. Personally, I don't like depending on tools, but... Remy left quite a useful character for you. No, that's not it. My intuition was right. I had a bad feeling, so I made it rain, but to use gadgets... She's pretty smart, too. Miss Patchouli? Oh, nothing. It's nothing. Anyway, you won, so you can move on. Will I be able to see Lady Romelia soon? Yes, she's waiting at the clock tower just past here. Since it's Remy we're talking about, I'm sure she's itching to play with you. After Miss Patchouli, I can't let Lady Romelia wait. Oh, Miss Patchouli, please go home and rest. Yes, I will head back to Scarlet Devil Mansion first. The real one. As I thought, it was Miss Patchouli who created this world. Next is Lady Romelia at last. I must hurry to Lady Romelia to escape this world as soon as possible. And with that, we can move over to the next room and grab our colored key for this stage, the green key, so now we can access the clock tower in earnest. Which, fun fact, between this recording and the last, I actively went and watched a speedrun for the game because I hadn't done that in a while. So the fun thing is, everything we've done since the end of part 1 is more or less skipped in the speedrun, because right next to where the Marisa boss fight was in the second stage, there's a door we don't have the key for yet still, that loops around from a later stage. In that speedrun, they actively use a nearby cannonball enemy's attack to push themselves below the floor and get through that door without having the key, so they just skip straight from effectively mid to late stage 2, effectively straight to the end game. That means they are noticeably lower leveled, but not for nothing, they play it pretty good. Also, I just accidentally used a shop card right there, but that at least shows us how it actively works. Nitori just shows up and you can buy stuff from her and sell stuff to her. I didn't mean to use that. Oopsie. But not for nothing, that's part of why I mentioned I really like how the shop tickets work in this game compared to the library cards in Symphony of the Night. As this game, the shop ticket brings the shop to you. In Symphony of the Night, it takes you to the shop. So if this worked like Symphony, I would have just warped from where we are right now all the way over to where Nitori was, all the way back in the first stage. And not for nothing, another issue I actively have with this game's level design is that largely the warp rooms in this game have some of the most confusing placement I've ever seen in this genre. If you're trying to actively go to important locations, they are nowhere near them. But it does feel like they tried to place them in places that are relatively close to where pickups you can't grab on a first playthrough of an area are. And I'm so split on it, because when it comes to getting some of the items you need to backtrack for with later game movement abilities, it's pretty handy. But if you're trying to, say, reach the shop's main location at all, it is so out of the way. Which, mind you, that's not an issue unique to this game. But I think some of it could have been alleviated by just having 2 warp rooms in some of the larger stages. With that said, a bit of a blanket statement here, admittedly. If there's one thing I'm very glad most Metroidvanias took notes on by looking at the 2 namesakes of the genre, is that they very specifically took notes from the later Castlevania end of the spectrum by letting you just select which warp rooms you want to warp to directly. That was always one of the most annoying things about going back to Symphony of the Night, even though I know which warp room is which pretty well by that point. Heck, when Metroid itself eventually got warp rooms during the Mercury Steam games, they actively took that note as well, albeit a little bit differently for reasons we'll talk about later. With that said, time for our third and final aura type in the game. While green auras will only move while time is stopped and purple auras will move the same way no matter what, objects with yellow auras will move in reverse when time is stopped. There's times where that's pretty easy to get around. There's times where you really need to mash the stopwatch on and off to avoid a hazard because of that. With that said, I do think it is probably the most interesting of the 3 aura types to work with. If only because you really do have to keep in mind what the object is and what its movement is to really understand how to get around it. With that said, most of the time you see them, they're gonna be this type of rotating, I guess, clock blade. And in most cases, you can just either worm your way between the blades or even just duck underneath them. So these are a bit of a weird enemy right here, these weird little bubbles that I'm actively not sure if they're from one of the mainline games. The way they work is that when you kill them, you don't kill them. They just get destroyed, but then another one immediately spawns in from the background. I don't believe they give you experience points, but they are decently reliable for farming up grazes in the case you want to try and farm up some HP or MP. The bigger annoyance is trying to get back around them, because since they also spawn back in while time is stopped, even if they don't move while time is stopped unless they have an aura, it can definitely lead to some pretty crowded hallways, not for nothing. With that said, and this is admittedly a sentence that's very familiar to Castlevania players, the clock tower here is probably the most dangerous stage in the game. Not overall the hardest, as counting bosses, there are technically harder bosses left. But there's a lot they throw at you very quick here, and you have to worm your way through some very tight corridors like that squeezed through a duck right there. Anything that's not a gear or a conveyor belt, you might as well just look at with suspicion, and most of them do damage comparable to spikes, so be careful. Also probably the most out-of-the-way hidden breakable wall, just directly up in that corner to get a knife up. With that said, when it comes to getting collectibles in the game, you always have a good idea of what's in a given stage, because every single stage in the game has 3 trash cans you can put cans into from nearby vending machines, an HP up, an MP up, a time up, and a knife up. And these all get listed on the game's map screen if you pause the game. Specifically, it's in the top left on a grid. They'll list each thing within a specific row and column. And that makes actively getting 100% in this game pretty easy to do on top of its overall smaller scale map. Speaking of trash cans, weird thing about this room, it has 2 of them. For some reason, in specifically the last 2 of the main stages in the game, they'll start playing with the trash cans a little bit in ways that's a bit weird. There's not always a vending machine unique to one, or they'll place the trash can in a really out-of-the-way location. There's times where some of those can get a little tight with the timer, with the time gauge, but as long as you're grabbing most of the time-ups along the way, you don't have to worry about it too much. This, by the way, is the room I've been kind of foreshadowing the entire game up to now. I really don't like the placement of this specific yellow rotating saw, because you just have to constantly turn the stopwatch on and off to get around it. It's not even that it's hard, it just feels kind of weirdly slow-paced compared to the rest of the game's platforming, because as long as you're good about killing enemies along the way, this game moves at a really good pace platforming-wise, except for that right there. That just feels like a weird pace breaker. So in that previous room, we want to break left over towards where this save point is and move beyond, because in order to get the movement upgrade for this stage, we need to go along this route. And admittedly, this is probably one of my favorite platforming puzzles in the game here, because we're going to have a giant room above us we need to move back towards the right in. But you may have seen, there was some yellow debris on the ground. We need to actively reverse that to make it into platforms and then go along this top side while platforms are collapsing beneath us in a way that's just genuinely really fun to do. With that said, one of the harder to visually notice power-ups in the game is hidden beneath this piece right here. That's where the HP up is for this stage. That took me a little longer to find than I'd like to admit, because I just time stopped and walked over that without it collapsing a few times. These have always been a little bit annoying to me, because they just instantly get out of your way as soon as you try to attack them. I think their main purpose is they're meant to be there to be literal feed for your time gauge and grazes and all that, but it's just always felt a little weird. Here we get the movement upgrade for this stage, the screw knife. This allows us to destroy wooden boxes. I guess it's more of an attack upgrade than a movement upgrade, but you know what I mean. Now, this is a pretty straightforward movement mechanic overall, but what's really annoying is, if you think carefully, we've been seeing those since a hidden room in stage 1. This is why I largely recommend waiting until you get every notable upgrade for Salpia before you go grab items from earlier stages you could have missed and saw along the way. As, while a single item is a nice upgrade, you have to go so far out of the way because of the placement of warp rooms to get some of them that you might as well get them all done at once and save yourself a little time rather than having to backtrack to see if you can now do a certain power-up. Which is just kind of a weird way for one of these to feel. I think a good way to put it is, this game tries to have its cake and eat it too by being sort of a stage-based Metroidvania, while also having one overall map, and it just feels kind of weird because of that. Like stage-based Metroidvanias, for example. I immediately think of Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, Castlevania Order of Ecclesia. The new Shinobi also falls into that wheelhouse. They largely all have smaller stages like this does, but because they're all distinctly separate, it feels like, A, it's easier to swallow any backtracking you might need to do with later abilities, but also, B, the smaller stages feel like they actively are more designed to be individual entities. In that usually if you get a new ability, it'll allow you to traverse the areas a lot more faster and all that. Whereas in this game, they really don't do that. Any new abilities you get are either required for progress along a linear route or to access a small side room in an earlier level, and it just feels weird due to that. Now, admittedly, having to do the latter is very much a thing in the overall interconnected Metroidvanias too, but I think most of the ones I've played at least tend to either have better warp room placements for moments like that, or at least you have better movement utility that allows you to get through areas more quickly. I guess in some regards, thinking about how this game is built up, it does kind of remind me weirdly of Metroid 2 Return of Samus, because you're just going through little side paths to get an upgrade, to then go through the main path and fight the main thing, which is the Metroids in that case. You can argue a lot of Metroidvanias are set up like that, but it's specifically how the levels feel that it does remind me of that, albeit I do think I prefer to play this than I do Metroid 2. So a moment ago, we got our next sub-weapon. That one is the Shield Dagger. That spawns a shield around Sakura that can protect you, I believe, from projectiles specifically, while it rotates around with two swords that do some, honestly, pretty quick hits. It's got okay damage, but while I see what the use case of it is, because you're meant to use it next to bosses and enemies to get damage while also getting your grazes in, I tend not to use it too much, as most of the time I'm doing grazing, I'm getting your projectiles, which don't exactly take damage, now do they? In the right hands, like pretty much every sub-weapon in the game, it can be extraordinarily good. It's just the one I tend to use the least, barring the ones we get at the literal final moments of the game. And one specific one that is more useful on a first playthrough because of what it can help you do, but I'll talk more about that next time, I believe. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 4, we're gonna go meet up with Miss Romelia finally, and see if we can get out of this castle. See you guys then.